Is this statement true as a matter of fact?
Mm-hmm.
All people are equal and endowed with unalienable rights, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes. Yes. I'm not going to, do you want me to elaborate? I can, but I think that's one of our fundamental principles of our country.
Do you believe that government exists to secure those rights?
Yes.
So basically, you believe in natural rights.
I'm not going to go into a debate or a definition of what natural rights is, but I believe in the two statements you said. But let me ask you, what do you mean by natural rights?
The concept that the founders believed in, and that's basically part of the start of the Declaration of Independence, is a statement of what natural rights.
So if you're referring to the way I learned it in elementary school, yes. I know that sometimes these political terms take on new meanings as time goes on, but I believe that the Founding Fathers believed that all people had inalienable rights, which I also believe in.
So to go back to what the founders believed, for example, in the Federalist Papers, that the Constitution formed a federal government, not a national government, and that the federal government should remain small and limited in power, with states having greater power. Do you agree with this conception of federal government?
I do, but I think the problem today is not about big or small government. I think that's an old argument, because a lot of conservatives are fighting for the biggest government we've ever had. If you look at the government today, under President Trump, we have the biggest deficit in history. It's growing, $3 trillion deficit. He promised to cut the deficit. The deficit is growing. So I think it's about who is the big government for. Is the big government serving the interests of the people, or the big government serving corporations and the most elite Americans? I think you need to have a smart government, a government that is effective and efficient. And I think what we have today in America is just a bloated government in many ways, but serving not the regular people, serving the most elite interests in the country.
There's a common misconception in America today that the three branches of government are co-equal. But that isn't really the founders' thought. Congress was meant to be the stronger branch of government, then the executive, then the judiciary. Today, though, through the administrative state, the executive branch has become the stronger branch as Congress has ceded more and more of its legislative power to the executive. Should Congress reassert its preeminent role in government?
I think Congress's role has been greatly diminished. And I think our most recent president, by ignoring subpoenas and ignoring the requests of Congress and completely just disregarding any request for information whatsoever, that should trouble not only people that are Democrats, but also Republicans as well. We're creating precedents, just like you said, that are enhancing the executive branch to a level of power well beyond anything we've ever seen before. So Congress should have more of a role than it does today and be stronger. And I think it's not just this president. This president's taken it to a whole new level. But over the last several decades, you see a decrease in the power of Congress, whether it's with the war power or in many other ways.
Do you have any ideas, if elected to Congress, how you might lead the transformation of the relationship between Congress and the executive?
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to be assertive, I would say that. I think that there's this deferential view that the executive can do what he wants in America today. I think that's wrong. I think whether through legal action or otherwise, it's coming to a point where Congress has to take an assertive role to reclaim some of the rights that the Founding Fathers originally wanted. It's painful for people to watch that, because Americans in general are good-natured people who do not want to see political strife like that. But I do believe the system of check and balances that we have today in America is greatly weakened from what it was or what the Founding Fathers originally intended. But that also requires more than just legal enforcement. It requires common decency and adherence to common norms of practice and behavior. We're finding out now in America that if the executive wants to do something, the only way to stop him is legal action that may not have an effect if there's not a political will to stop him. So I think there's an enforcement of legal standards, but also of moral standards and ethical standards and standards of common decency and behavior that need to be enforced across the way.
So if rights are natural, when does a person obtain those rights? At what point between conception?
Well, if you're asking me
now,
when until what point do I think abortion should be legalized? I suppose, let me just back up on that question. Instead of answering that question, I'm going to tell you what I think about abortion in general. I believe that as a man, I am not going to enforce my will or my religious beliefs on others. Obviously, this is a very sensitive question that people on both sides have very fervent views about. And those views are strong and fiercely held, and we should be respectful on both sides. But a lot of the reason we have pushback on abortion comes from people's fervently held, sacred religious views. And I understand that. But for many other people, it's a medical issue. And we do not live in a theocracy. We live in a country of laws and secular laws and standards. And I do not believe because someone holds a fervent religious view, they should have the ability to enforce that view on somebody else. And that's why we have a court of law. That's why we have laws in each state that set the standards for these for when an abortion is necessary and required. And I leave that up to the courts to determine and for the people to determine that go to make the cases to the courts. But I believe that there are fervent views on both sides that need to be taken into account. And I do not believe we should live in a theocracy where you can enforce your view no matter how fervently held.
Could there be a scientific basis for determining when a person obtains that personhood that then they have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
I'm not a scientist, but I believe in science, and I think it's a difficult question to answer. It's a question that we've been struggling with for centuries, right? But I do think it's inappropriate for a single legislature or a single group of people to undermine rights that have been held in this country at the highest level, at the Supreme Court level, for generations. And I understand they're doing this to challenge those Supreme Court rulings, but currently it's legal under our laws. So whether you believe it's wrong morally or from a religious perspective, it still remains legal both here in New York State and across the country.
Among the founding theses of our government, part of the Enlightenment thinking is that each individual should be free to enjoy the fruits of his or her own labor. Do you agree with that concept?
I do, but I think, Howard, what you're getting at is some type of discussion regarding a meritocracy, or whether someone is, if you work hard, should you be able to keep what you've made? And I think that is a generally held position of most Americans. The problem is you see a society where people are working 2 or 3 jobs and getting almost nothing. So I saw, when you see these jobs numbers, thousands and thousands of jobs were created. Well, the old joke is, I got to hold 2 or 3 of them to have what somebody had 30 or 40 years ago. Now, I just saw a statistic the other day that in America, CEO pay has risen by 1,000% over the last 3 decades. 1,000%. So this idea, I think there's an idea that you're either a strict capitalist or you're some kind of wild socialist. I'm a capitalist, but I believe our capitalist system has gone awry because it's not an open marketplace. The marketplace is created by rules and laws. Those rules and laws are created by people. And the lawyers and the lobbyists that work for these corporations and work for the most wealthy people have the most influence on those rules and laws. For example, why do you not have a casino license and somebody else does? Because somebody had the political power or the capital to get that casino license. And it's a limited monopoly of a casino license. And they have a right under the law to keep that license, where if you started a casino in your basement, you go to jail. So we have these laws and this capitalist system with exceptions like I just mentioned, and with exceptions like the different punishments for different types of crimes. Now, Mr. Collins, the man I ran against, he stole money. That's what insider trading is. It's theft. He sold many hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'll be in jail for a year. But if you went to the 7-Eleven and stole $50, you'd probably be in jail for a couple of years. So these values that we bring to this system and what the rules are often favor the most powerful. I want a system that is truly a meritocracy like you described, but a meritocracy based on the people being represented by people like myself who go to Congress and say, I'm going to fight for people who do not have lobbyists, do not have lawyers, who need someone to look at their interests, so we are saving capitalism. I really believe that's what's at stake here, is because we're moving towards something that looks more like an oligarchy or plutocracy. And I would like to have a truly capitalist system. I'm all about cutting taxes, just not cutting taxes on people who already have billions and billions of dollars of unused or unusable capital, dynastic wealth. I want to cut taxes for the people here in Batavia, the restaurateurs and the small businessmen. I do not want to cut taxes on people that have massive dynastic fortunes. I think that's what the last tax bill did. So to go back to your question, yes, if you work hard, you should be able to keep as much of that as possible. But also, all work should be valued, and we should give everyone a chance, not just create a system where only a few people have a chance to make sure that their fortunes are valued.
So I want to riff on something.
Go ahead.
You talk about
Sure.
Casino licenses.
Yeah.
What about a license to cut hair, a license to style hair, a license to drive a taxi?
Or a legal license, yeah.
Should government interfere in the marketplace like that encourages rent-seeking, basically, that only a few chosen people can get into the profession?
Well, I think that it depends. Everything is a balance of the totality of circumstances, right? So you want to have people that have medical license because you want to make sure that people that are doctors are not going to kill people. So you want to have standards. So sometimes those type of restrictions are justified. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just to benefit a handful of people. And for years, frankly, we had taxi medallions were just that. They were exclusive monopolies that were traded and highly valued. And now you have a different system where we're changing, and it's transforming because of Uber and Lyft and everything else. So if your question is, do we have to be careful about creating monopolies? Yes. I'm not sure who said it. One of the founding fathers said, anytime you have 2 or 3 people of the same profession gathered together, you have a conspiracy against the public. And I think there's some truth to that. I always talk to you about this whenever I meet you. I am someone, my belief system is not easily to be classified because I do believe in the free market. Where I'm different than other people who will say that, I don't think there's some magical free market out in the woods that we need to capture. And if we can just let that free market loose, it will solve all of our problems. I believe that human beings create the market. Just like any farmer's market, the rules have to be established. And the fairness of those rules depend on the openness of the legislative process and the access of the average American to democracy. So in many ways, yeah, you and I would agree on many of these principles. I just look at the problems that are undermining these principles differently.
The previous question about the Fruits Bureau labor, really part of where I was going to that is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the old legal case, Lochner v. New York.
Sure.
So should people be free to negotiate the terms of their own employment?
They should, but the thing is with any negotiation under the law, for example, I'll give you an example. If you were ill and I came to your house and you were under duress, and I said, Howard, I want you to sign all your assets away to me. And you signed that contract. That's an invalid contract. And when you have such massive inequality in negotiation power, like if an employee who really needs a job in a job market like NY-27, which I'll remind people is the worst job market in America, according to the Wall Street Journal, and you go to a major corporation to work, and you have a document that's hundreds of pages long that would require 6 lawyers to truly review, and you have zero negotiation power, and you're saying take it or leave it, there's a reason why we have labor laws. It's to protect people in unequal or unfair negotiation positions. And so if you're asking if people should just be able to be used freely for whatever purpose they, I believe that we should have labor laws to protect workers who are in a weakened position from a negotiation standpoint, and who have zero leverage whatsoever, but are still providing valuable work.
Use the example coming from like a large corporation perspective, but the vast majority of businesses are small businesses, and small business owners don't necessarily have the same leverage that a big company does. And using the Lochner example of a baker, I mean, if somebody wants to apprentice at a bakery and work 60 hours a week
right.
at a wage that they believe is fair, should they have a right to do that? It
depends on the totality of the circumstances. I know here in NY-27, the rural Democrats have not supported some of the labor laws that apply to agriculture because it's a different type of business that requires different standards. It doesn't mean people should be exploited, but you cannot apply the same standards to a farm in NY-27 as you would apply to a law firm in New York City. So it depends on the circumstances, and you have that balancing in law, right? And the blind balancing. Every situation needs to be looked at differently, but I think to say from an ideological perspective or just blanketly that we can't have labor laws because it's up to the negotiation of the individuals, that puts people at risk, and that undermines freedom in many circumstances. And there's also, we have standards. You can't sell me your liver. You can't sell me your arm. You can't sell me, there's a lot of things, prostitution, we go on, there's lots of things that are illegal types of contracts. Every country, every society has limits on contracts that have to be balanced by the totality of the circumstances. You can't give away something that is illegal to give away. So if I went to that bakery and said, you know what, I am so hungry that I would work for free, I can live in the basement. If there wasn't laws to prevent such type of activity, people would be exploited. Or, I am so hungry, I'll sell my kidney. It sounds ridiculous, but that's the type of problems that happen in certain parts of the world. That's why you need a marketplace that creates certain standards of moral decency and also balances the interests of all parties.
Picking up on the right to contract sort of thing, if part of the employment contract includes health insurance, should the government be able to take away your health insurance?
Give me an example. I'm trying to understand.
Where I'm going to this is Medicare for all.
Well, no, I don't. Listen. When you say Medicare for all, people want to think that it's going to blatantly take all types of insurance away. Let me talk about the three types of systems that exist in most OECD countries. You have the British model, which is complete control. Every single doctor works for the system. The hospitals are all governed by the system. That's truly socialized care. Now, that care is very popular in the UK generally. Most politicians, actually, it'd be difficult to find a politician that would say, we want to turn away from this system. Usually the argument is we want to grow the system or put more resources into the system. Then you have Canada, which is slightly different. Canada is a single-payer system. Single-payer means the government controls prices, regulates prices for drugs and certain treatments, so you have a scope to understand, well, if I break my arm, it's going to cost me about this much. They set standards for services. And the government pays private organizations and private hospitals from that single-payer system that everybody pays into. In America, we have a free-for-all. You can go to the hospital. You have no idea what it's going to cost you. You have no idea how long you're going to be there. One person can go in with one insurance and pay $50,000. Another one can go with a different insurance, pay $5. There's no standards whatsoever. It's completely subject to the private system. So you have people that are being bankrupted at a highest rate. And here's the thing. We're spending nearly 20% of GDP on healthcare in America. Yet we have fewer hospital beds than our other countries, the highest drug costs, a declining life expectancy for the last 30 years. So you have the worst outcomes in health, but we spend the most. So the argument that the private sector in this circumstances is most efficient is just not based on facts. And we talked about science and facts earlier. The facts tell us we have the least efficient system in the entire industrialized or developed world. And so to the Medicare for all, do I want to take away private insurance? No. You can always have private insurance. And Medicare for all is a catch-all phrase. What I want is single-payer healthcare, meaning that the government regulates drug prices, regulates the price of insulin. Let's talk about insulin for a second. I have a niece who has diabetes, beautiful little girl. They pay, thankfully my brother has a decent job where he can pay the cost of the insulin. Now insulin was originally created by the University of Toronto professors who gave it to the university for $1 because they wanted it to be the whole world to have it. That patent was later sold to a medical company who has gouged American consumers for years. Now, there's no improvements on what insulin can do, but the prices continue to rise because we know, just like if you go to Wendy's down the street here, Their goal is to decrease labor, decrease costs of goods, and to increase prices. That's what profit does. You can't run a system that's based on care if those are your principles. If those are your principles, you're going to get what we have in America, which is less nurses, less access to doctors, more expensive costs. It's the same.
One of your tweets that I saved was you said that millions of people die each year because health insurance greed. Are you able to substantiate that?
Absolutely. You can absolutely do it. You can look at the life expectancy in America, the number of beds. I can take you to homes here in NY-27 that have been devastated by bankruptcy. And healthcare bankruptcy is on the rise in this country. It is continually starts to degrade the quality of life that so many people have. It's not right when in countries that we protect, like South Korea, like Japan, you can get the exact same treatment that you can get here for pennies on the dollar. And those are capitalist, those are capitalist countries. It's not like Japan is not a capitalist country. South Korea is the 12th biggest economy in the world. But people there have more access in many ways to cheaper care that's comparable to what you get in the United States. The reason why we have these problems in America is because of corporate and insurance greed. Before you go on, I want to talk about this for a second. Realize that in this country, some of our hospitals have venture capital funds, completely unrelated to any type of healthcare or research and development, simply to make profit. So they're taking the medical services that they're making money on and investing it in real estate and whatever else. CEO pay in hospitals continues to go up. Admin pay continues to go up. It's completely bloated and inefficient. And if people don't agree with me, go to the hospital in Medina. I was just there. If you go there tonight, Howard, and you have a car accident, or some other horrible thing happens, you might be greeted by one nurse. One nurse is often on staff there by themselves. One nurse, if a schizophrenic person comes off the street or a gunshot wound, they have to call for help. And it's not like we're in a third world country. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. That's why we need to have bold thought on healthcare.
The per capita expenditure for healthcare in the U.S. is about $12,000 per year, by 2018 numbers. The average per person cost for health coverage is less than $7,000. So in other words, we're spending $12,000 per person, but insurance companies are only charging $7,000 per person on average. So does that really sound like health insurance greed?
No, but you can look at the profit margins that have increased by the insurance companies. There's massive greed, or CEO pay, or pharmaceutical pay, or the pharmaceutical industry profit. That is massive greed. We're talking about profits on drug. Okay, let's talk about patents for a second. Patents we talked about the Founding Fathers earlier. The Founding Fathers originally said we are going to create this patent law because we want to protect creativity. But there's limits on the patent law because eventually it should become part of the common good so people can use this. Pharmaceutical companies have lobbied for the last 100 years, literally, to lengthen those patents, to find different ways to make small variations to extend the patents. And the patent law continues to make these patents more and more protected. So the pharmaceutical companies continue to charge huge costs for the same pharmaceuticals. Now, in other countries where you don't have a strictly private sector only healthcare market, the government steps in and says, we are going to regulate the price of some of these drugs. We are going to bargain and negotiate with the drug companies ourselves. And it's to the benefit of consumers and of citizens. Now, it's not because they want to destroy the citizens or they want to destroy the drug companies. It's because these drug companies have already squeezed every dollar out of those patents for decades and decades. So I do believe you can make one statistic. We can point to many statistics in the increase in CEO pay, in the increase of venture capital funds related to nonprofit hospitals, the increase of insurance company fraud and abuse, and also pay for executives. I disagree with your assumption.
As we've discussed before, the healthcare industry is not truly free market. You have the employer mandate, government sanctioned lack of competition among providers, hospital mergers, which encourages rent-seeking, you might call it greed, without reining in the escalating cost of healthcare, say on the provider side. How will a single payer not eventually bankrupt the country?
Well, again, we pay more per capita than any OECD country right now, almost 20% of GDP on healthcare, and we have some of the worst healthcare outcomes in the world for advanced or industrialized countries. So we are already bankrupting the country. And that doesn't even include all the private bankruptcies that occur because people can't pay their bills. We are already bankrupting the country. This argument that single payer will bankrupt the country is just not feasible or doesn't make any sense logically when you have the type of debt we're creating already. Single payer will control costs, control costs of drugs, it will control costs of other services, it will set prices and say you have to abide by these prices. Right now, what happens when you go to a doctor or a nurse, they create a code. People go to school for this. People listening to this right now will know what I'm talking about. Everything is coded. And that code is sent to an insurance company who has their own code. And then they have a battle about which codes apply and which codes don't. Just like if you have an insurance problem in your house, you'll have an insurance assessor come and say, hey, look, this is covered, this is not covered, this is not covered. You have these massive battles about payment because everyone's trying to save that buck. What they're really trying to do is make a profit. And every company in the world, profit has to go up every single year to hit your plan. So the basic motivations of the system is not health, it's profit. So a lot of the inefficiencies you're talking about are based on the fact there's a nonstop battle between insurance companies that need to increase profits and healthcare providers who, just like any other provider of a service, want to cut costs, want to cut labor. So it's this nonstop cycle of increased costs because of the admin fees of fighting between the different codings and the different services that are provided or covered or not covered. We have a terribly inefficient system, and the assumption that if we made it more public or more private, if we made it more of a private sector system, that it'd become more efficient, is just not logical based on 40 years of deregulation, of increased costs, and increased complications.
If you're controlling costs, well, first of all, the question that occurred to me when we were talking is, should there be no profit in healthcare?
No profit, that's an extreme alternative. No profit versus the maximum profit you can possibly get is a very different thing. And these publicly traded companies, drug companies, and even hospitals that are so-called non-profit hospitals, they have to create a profit for shareholders every single year. They demand the same profit you'd get from any other type of private enterprise. So I think a balancing of the interests here through a single-payer system that helps regulate costs is what makes sense. You wouldn't accept what you have in the healthcare industry and any other industry. If you went to a car dealership and said, I'm going to buy a car, how much is this Ford Explorer? And he said to you, I don't know. It depends. I have no clue. It depends on how long you're going to drive it. I mean, you would not accept the same things that we accept when we go to a hospital. You would not accept the fact that you may have out-of-network costs simply because your insurance doesn't apply to a doctor that is in the same hospital that came over to service you for a specialty need. It's all based on saving money to make a profit. So I'm not saying we should have no profit, but I'm not saying the profit should not be the primary goal of our health system. Care should be the primary goal of our health system.
I'm sure you're familiar with the argument of socialism versus capitalism versus central planning, having central planners that set prices versus the free market, where there's so much information that get exchanged that no central planner can know all the information that really goes into creating dynamic pricing. Isn't what you're describing, where where single player controls pricing, isn't that socialism?
Absolutely not. It's not socialism. Socialism is control of the means of production by the proletariat. It's very different than saying we should not let price gouging happen. If you had a hurricane in Batavia today, and I had a convenience store and I started selling water at $600 a bottle, that's price gouging. And that's the same thing that happens to people who need insulin. in this country. It's price gouging. Now, to say that's socialism because we don't want companies, for-profit enterprises, to gouge people in need of care, that's very different. We're not talking about socialism. We're talking about controlling greed and controlling exploitation of people in need. And that's all it is. It's the same thing that's done. Would you call Australia a socialist country? Would you call Japan, extremely capitalist country, would you call that a socialist country? They regulate drug prices. They regulate Eli Lilly. They regulate all those companies. They're not socialist countries. They're countries that are exploiting, gouging. They're preventing the exploitation of the citizens.
The libertarian side of me doesn't even like the term price gouging. I'd be the guy charging $600 because price information tells the market what the demand is, and if I'm able to get $600 for a bottle of water, it encourages suppliers to get more water down here.
Well,
that's how information is transmitted to the market to help meet dark market demand.
Mm-hmm.
So it still sounds, what you're proposing still sounds like socialism to me, because anything that...
So you think any time in our country where we set the prices or standards of pricing at all in any way is socialism?
Pretty much, yeah.
So you believe in absolute libertarianism?
Well, I believe that free markets should be free to transmit information.
So you don't believe in monopolies like Standard Oil, or you don't believe that's possible? Because Standard Oil could seize the price of all oil and create a cartel. There's a reason why we have anti-monopoly law. It's because we're trying to control what I'm talking about, which is price exploitation. It's antitrust law is the same basic principle. You can't let people control or dominate a market where they can exploit consumers. This isn't socialism. It's basic common U.S. legal principle.
That's the Borkian argument. That's not what the Sherman Antitrust Act initially was about. The Sherman Antitrust Act was about protecting competition. The big example was, say, A&P compared to like Walmart today. A&P was argued against as a monopoly because they put mom and pop out of business. Main Street businesses out of business by using their marketing power. Walmart's been able to succeed because of Robert Bork's essay saying, no, the greatest good is that consumers should pay the lowest price, and competition doesn't really matter. And that's a big reason, in my mind, that we see today so fewer startup businesses. Since the 80s, startup businesses have been cut in half. We think we live in the era because of Mark Zuckerberg of entrepreneurship, but really we're in a depression when it comes to creating new businesses. And
I agree with that.
And that's because of the Robert Bork's and allowing his conception, now part of the Federal Trade Commission, that monopoly is only a problem if consumers aren't benefiting. And so Walmart's not a monopoly because they create lower prices.
There is strict standards on what a monopoly is or what a monopoly is not. Listen, I'm just making this simple. If something, just take all the terminology or political science terminology out of it, and think about this. If a doctor created insulin and gave it away for $1, go ahead.
43 seconds.
Okay, I'll just say it quickly. If a doctor created insulin and gave it away $1 to a university to serve the public, there's no way that people should be paying $600 or $700 a week for something that was given away free to serve the public. And the essential problem I have is, I disagree with you. I believe there's price gouging. It's not about profit. It's about maximum profit. Like the EpiPen situation, we can point to many other situations of pure greed in that industry.
But we're still kind of in the capitalist versus socialist vein. Do you support a wealth tax?
I do. Same way. That's what. Let's talk about the history of the income tax to begin with. The income tax was created during the period of the robber barons. Have you ever been to Rhode Island? They have these humongous summer homes that were created during the robber baron era, the Gilded Age. These huge houses, and there was a worry that America was going to lose democracy because of the power of a certain elite class. And they said, look, at the way they're creating wealth, it's dynastic wealth, that will last for centuries and create such power over the media, over the political organs, massive power, that if it's not checked, the average person will have no voice in society. So we created a income tax. That income tax was challenged. It was challenged by the most wealthy and elite. It went to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, it's valid. And the income tax varied up to 90% at certain points in our history. 90%. That's not what I'm talking about at all. And then even up until the 60s and 70s, it was up to 70 or something percent or something like that. And then there was a change in our laws and said it needs to apply universally to all people, and lowered dramatically for the most wealthy elite. The purpose that was originally put in place for, which is a check on elite power, it was taken away. So do I believe that what happened last year with a tax cut that gave probably the biggest wealth shift in the history of our country, well, definitely, by the numbers, trillions of dollars shifted hands to the most wealthy Americans. Your check or my check or someone else's check has a few dollars difference, but if you have an estate, or if you have massive real estate holdings, or if you have a massive stock portfolio, your tax burden dramatically changed. Or a corporation, the biggest corporations in America, S Corps, C Corp, like if you saw what happened with that law, those corporations had a windfall. Now, with that windfall, what happened? Now, according to the theory, if you remove the tax burden on the most wealthy Americans and the most elite corporations, it should be a trickle down for everybody. But Howard, the GDP growth is lower than it was under Jimmy Carter. It's lower than it was under Jimmy Carter. The tax cut was a major failure. So you had the opposite of a wealth tax, a wealth giveaway to the most elite. And it created a massive inequality growth in this country. And it also created the biggest deficit in our country's history. And before you cut me off on this one, now President Trump put forward a new budget. It's called America's Future, I think. In that budget, we continue to see massive deficits. We're going to have a situation soon where the deficit, the debt service will outpace military spending in a few years. That's insane. Forget the cuts to Social Security that he said wouldn't happen. Forget the cuts to Medicaid that he said wouldn't happen. Forget the cuts to Medicare that he said wouldn't happen. They're all in there. There's also this ballooning deficit. And so the response is, well, you got to cut something, we have a deficit. No, you didn't. You didn't have to give away all those taxes to the richest people in America. So do I believe we need a tax system that benefits the middle class? Yes. Protects the middle class, cuts taxes to the middle class? Yes. But I also believe we need to increase taxes on the most wealthy. The original purpose of the income tax.
So you're talking about income tax. What Elizabeth Warren talks about with the wealth tax, and other progressives have picked it up, is taxing Jeff Bezos' billions of dollars worth of wealth. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you support that kind of wealth tax.
We have to. I do in principle, but how it's applied is different. Jeff Bezos, no matter how much you tax him, Howard, unless you take it all, you're never going to be able to touch his wealth. It's so massive. The type of wealth he has is growing and so massive that it literally will benefit his heirs and descendants for 10,000 years. And he did that. What we have now in this current capitalist system is schisms. He's a great entrepreneur. He's a great mind to create Amazon. But Amazon isn't insulin. Amazon isn't some life-changing new discovery. Amazon is an online retailer. An online retailer that has created more wealth than the Rothschilds ever had. And you're talking about a wealth tax. I paid more federal taxes last year than Amazon did. They paid $0 in federal taxes. Just on a common sense level, that doesn't make sense that Nate McMurray or the people listening to this should pay more taxes than Amazon. And so, yes, we have to figure out a way to apply taxes to the most wealthy, because if we don't, the system will become more and more imbalanced, and our rights will continue to be deprived.
I'm going to read, this is an excerpt from a
Go ahead.
Magazine article. I didn't write down what source it came from.
Mm-hmm.
part of what I want to preface this with is, I would say over the last year or two, as I've looked at your tweets, you've often aligned with the very progressive side of the Democratic Party. You've had good things to say about AOC and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
I think that's not true. Before I go any further, I think I said good things about a lot of different people. I think, like you, Howard, my political ideology is diverse. I think that a lot of people feel not comfortable in either party, and the strict left-right divide, I don't think it makes any sense. I think we all have beliefs all over the place. I hate to live in a country, if you say one good thing about AOC, who's this firebrand, young woman, that you're suddenly in bed with every single belief that she has. I want to live in a country we can talk about ideas. And I can praise, on one day I can praise Ronald Reagan, which I often do, or I can praise George Bush Sr. or whatever, and then we can have an open discussion of ideas. I just wanted to cut you off on that because I don't agree with it in principle. I think the divide in America today is more about power versus no power, and I think this left-right divide makes less and less sense.
Do you think you can separate yourself from, I know the Republicans are going to go this route, that you're just another progressive? I need to say this. We talked a lot about socialism earlier. I was a senior counsel at an $800 billion corporation. In Western New York, I was the assistant general counsel and the vice president of business development for my opponent's family's company. I made them millions of dollars. I create thousands and thousands of jobs. On the surface, to attack me as some radical socialist who wants to upheave everything and change the world and destroy America is a joke. I'm an Eagle Scout who went to school to become a corporate lawyer, was very successful at it, moved into business development, and made the people that are opposing me a lot of money. So to label me or throw me into that category doesn't make sense on the surface. Now, to put how crazy the world is, when I was trying to get the Democratic endorsement, you know what they said about me, Howard? Don't ever vote for Nate. He's a slick corporate lawyer we can never trust. So it depends who's making the accusation. But to call me a socialist, with the people that I'm running against, employ a radical socialist to make them money. It doesn't make any sense. So I wanted to make that point clear. And listen, win or lose, someone is going to hire me again to make them money because I'm very good at what I do. And I'm not from a wealthy family myself. I worked my way up. But to call me a socialist because I want people in Batavia to have health care, that's ridiculous. I think that's a good place to end right there.
Okay, thank you, sir.